So in the past weeks, at the time of recording at least, I have no idea when this video is actually getting uploaded, truthfully. Patelo was awakened. He was potentially one of the most anticipated awakenings in my memory, because you had Jamie being the equivalent of Layla and Sonara as the primary enabler for his synergy, but then Patelo was queued up to be the equivalent of Rhea and Salma as the secondary enabler, in effect, for the weakness synergy, because Rhea and Salma, of course, had the mirrored 40% troop attacks for 2 types and then total health, which Patelo also had. So he matched them in effect the same way that Jamie matched Sonara and Layla. And so people were expecting this over time for him to be released as a core component of the weakness synergy, and this only got reinforced further when some leaks came from Pioneer, and he was added here under the recommended lineups under weakness. So everyone was expecting him to be released and become core to all weakness builds, which are of course very popular, especially with mid-spenders. It's not cheap, but one of the cheaper competitive options to build your account, stuff like double, triple weakness with Jamie and then the healers around him. It's quite a cheap way to get your account to a fairly competitive level. However, on release, he was met with a fair bit of disappointment, honestly. He was in effect part of weakness synergy, but his actual 4-star ability, if you look at it, doesn't interact with weakness itself, it interacts with healing, so he's a healing synergy commander, which in my opinion, to date at least, from what I've seen in regards to discussions about him, is something that is being slightly overlooked, and the full details of what he contributes is being slightly underrated because people haven't looked too hard into what he actually does in reports, and we'll get onto that, of course. So I'll take this weapon off him for now, just so this is easier to see. He gives passively 90% infantry attack, 90% spear attack, and 40.8% total health, so he's very high statted in regards to spear attack, inf attack. He's the best in slot effectively for imp spear or spear imp lineups in terms of passive stats. Very good for mono spear, very good for mono imp. He's probably not going to help against rebel leaders at all. His abilities just aren't very good in regards to killing them. Where'd you even see that? Here. He might honestly be somewhat decent in training grounds with the anti-heal stuff as like a niche counter to stuff like Simon, but do not quote me on that because I have not tested it in the slightest, and I'm guessing no one really has because of how recent his awakening is, but that could be something to try a little bit if you haven't 4-star and have no other options. They're trying to get over someone in training grounds if anyone still cares about that at this point. I'll just throw this weapon back on him in case I forget, because that definitely sounds like something I would do. As I said previously, note the fact that it actually has no weakness synergy at all. Indirectly it sort of does, but that's only because healing is the enabler for Jamie, and therefore weakness attacks. But the fact it doesn't interact with weakness directly means you can actually hybrid it elsewhere into more situations where it can gain value which you wouldn't initially expect. So if we go and look at a report of him, I have one here on a rebel group, one of the new rebel groups. These are quite good for testing stuff, honestly. It's like a mini Relorge trial, although the reports of them are incredibly bugged, so you have to take some things with a pinch of salt here and there. But in terms of timings at least, they're consistent. Now, a key thing I think was overlooked in regards to the initial reception to him was how the healing received is actually triggered, because just like with triggering weakness attacks itself, you both do not need to actually receive healing, you only need to be targeted by it. So 0 healing will contribute towards the 10 instances of healing, but also, if you look in here, where does Lats start healing? So I have no Lats weapon, so it'll first start healing at 14, because her final defense buff will be at 13, and then it'll start healing at 14. So if you look here, it says Lats used the War Soul Awakening skill. Ally healed 322 inventory. So I'm trying to hover it. I can't. It doesn't show anything past this point. But if you see here, it says all lineups. So Lats' heal is effectively counting as 5 heals because it's targeting all 5 lineups. So you only need 2 instances of one of these healing enablers to actually go off, even if they heal 0, to proc Patelo. Because if we look back at his skill, you need 10 instances of healing. So the ways of healing in this game, it's like Hector, you have Lats, you have Enzo, Drake, you have Dragon Assist, but there aren't that many ways. It's primarily going to be Hector and Lats, Drake, and Enzo, really. You have Arslan as well, but he only heals 1 group every 8 seconds, so he's basically irrelevant in regards to this, because you just won't be able to heal enough groups for him to matter in any way. You can get him online a little quicker if you get Hector healing at 1 second against Salma procs, or if you look at the weapons, let's say Lats' weapon, it changes the stacking defense buff to only 3 times instead of 4 times, so this actually cuts 3 seconds off the initial heal timer. So if we go into Word, I'll just write this up. So if we go back to the report here, I'm running mono inf basically with just Lats, no weapon. Lats will start doing her stacking defense. Final one at 13. It will heal 5 groups at 14 here, and then it will heal 5 groups at 17 here. And then you see here, Ally Patelo use the War Awakening skill, and you gain Patelo's passives at 17 seconds with just Lats. So if you have Hector and one of Lats, Drake, or Enzo's weapon, or one of them with weapon, it will be active at 11 seconds, which means 29 seconds uptime across the fight, because fights last 40 seconds. Hector plus Lats, Drake / Enzo with no weapon equals active at 14 seconds. If it's, of course, one of Lats, Drake, or Enzo with no weapon and nothing else, it is 17 seconds, like in my report here. If it's 2 or 3 times them with no weapon, it will be 14 seconds. And if it's 2 or 3 of them with weapon, it will be 11 seconds. So you can see, if we go back to his tooltip, you're never going to need to actually wait for 25 seconds for this to be active at all. You can trigger it way earlier than that through healing, which makes him gain a lot of value, especially if you're looking at him just from the tooltip and thinking like 1 Lats heal counts as 1 instance of healing. I've seen a fair few people interpret it like that, and if it did work like that, it would be terrible. I agree. But then we can actually do some more maths with this. So like I said, fights last 40 seconds. So in the top instances, this would be 29 seconds of uptime. This would be 26 seconds of uptime. And then 17 seconds would be 23 seconds of uptime. So, as percentages, this would be 72.5% uptime on Patelo's buff across the fight, which that starts to read a lot better when you think of the attack and the flat damage reduction. 8% flat damage reduction, I know it's a low number, but that is a big deal. Like, the amount of health equivalent you'd need to effectively reduce the damage you take by 8% would be exceptionally high, like in the hundreds of percentage stats probably. So do not scoff at that number whatsoever, and I'll do some more maths to make it a bit clearer as well. So this would be 65% uptime, and this would be 57.5% uptime. Right. So that is uptime on an 8% damage reduction buff, plus the 30% attack. Now, just going off the damage reduction as well, or alone, you could do this for the attack stat as well. I'm not going to, just so it isn't too hard to consume visually, but the maths on this, if you account for the percentages, if it procs at 11 seconds, it will be effectively 5.8% damage reduction over the fight. Just copy that so I don't have to type for as long. 14 seconds proc would be 5.2% damage reduction over the fight, and 17 seconds proc would be 4.6% damage reduction over the fight, just as a flat number. So this isn't entirely an accurate representation because different synergies have different damage gradients. So for example, female does more burst early with like Selma proccing at 1 second, and then Layla will continuously multi-proc like Cersei and Dany. So you'll get a lot more burst early on before this comes and becomes active. But on the other side of the coin, weakness will be backloaded with damage, where Jamie needs time for the healing enablers to come online, just like we've seen here with Patelo. And so there'll need to be time for weakness attacks to start, and therefore weakness stacks to start being added up onto the opposing lineups. So weakness will gain more value than is listed here, and against female you'll gain less value than listed here, but this is just a good, or simple at least, visual representation of how exactly this is going to bring you value in a fight. Sorry, this is a very math-heavy video, but there's still a few more things to touch on. But this is what I mean, there's a lot of stuff about Patelo's ability that has just not been totally understood and realized in terms of what he actually brings, in my opinion. So, if we go back to the report and look at his ability itself. 17 seconds. Where is it? Here. So, use the War Awakening skill. Increase ally attack by 30%. Increases ally damage reduction by 8%. Now, admittedly, I don't know if this is just a visual bug or if this is actually taking effect, but you'll see here, increasing ally all lineups attack by 5%. Increasing ally all lineups damage reduction by 8%. If you look back at his tooltip, it says it should only be affecting the front row. So after it receives 10 instances of healing, the allied front row's attack is increased by 30%. But in reports, it implies that it's all lineups. So if you're running like triple weakness, you will gain, I think, all these bonuses on all 3 lines, which makes it go a lot further than the tooltip suggests. Now, even the damage reduction, that will help tanking stuff like Wildfire from Cersei. On the back lines, the 30% will go to like 90% if you're running triple weakness, and that's a big deal. That's a lot better than the tooltip reads itself. And as I mentioned earlier, Patelo isn't a weakness commander, he's a healing commander. And something I haven't really seen suggested, I'm sure out there in the community, in certain areas it has been, but in my alliance at least, and in my circles, I think I'm the only person I've seen actually point this out. He might have a real place in mid-spender bleed builds, because bleed has a very high entry barrier in terms of investment to be a viable account setup, because after Sonara, Rhea and Lats options get fairly short in terms of what's actually good. So Kevin is very, very good against weakness, but if you're against female, for example, he's terrible, like really bad, especially when you actually test him. But you can get Patelo to proc directly off Lats alone, as I've shown here. Like, he didn't actually interact with Jamie at all. He only interacted with Lats here. Sonara silences commanders and stops weakness attacks, but Lats' heal still goes off as normal. So you can hybrid in Patelo with a bleed build, and you will gain all his advantages still. So if you have Lats' weapon, you can get this to proc at 14 seconds. So if you go back here, that will be about an average of 5.2% damage reduction over the fight, plus the attack. And that could be very good, especially because he has such high inf attack, and obviously bleed is almost entirely an inf build. You can run bleed cav and inf cav and such, but it's primarily infantry. And obviously if you're one of the top accounts in the game, and you have Night King, John, Daeron, Sandor, this is an irrelevant point, but if you're a mid-spender, I see no way that Patelo isn't in the most meta bleed build for you, honestly, and I'd really look into adding him into one of those final spots in your lineup. And yeah, I think that is pretty much it. That is Patelo's Awakening, and my every Fortinet.